Last week in Michigan politics, your voice, your vote. As election season is only getting closer, what new polling has to say about major statewide races. Plus, a key step forward this week towards the next state budget, how state lawmakers might look to spend your taxpayer dollars. And a major Michigan utility is asking for a nearly $500 million rate hike. While, according to a 13 on Your Side review, it hasn't paid federal income taxes for years. A look at that request and company financials. I'm Josh Alburtus, and this is your 13 on Your Side rundown. We begin this week at the gas pump. Amidst the ongoing war with Iran and a major technical complication elsewhere in the Midwest, gas prices were nearing record highs across West Michigan late this past week. The average price of unleaded fuel was around $5 a gallon on Thursday. 13 on Your Side's Peter Elliott has more on why the sudden jump in price may be and how it may be felt.
I don't know that I've ever seen the double hike that we saw in Michigan yesterday.
Patrick DeHaan still can't believe it.
Prices, were $4.19, then they jumped to $4.79, and then another hour later, it was like, whoops, we were supposed to go up more to $4.99.
Just like drivers, Gas Buddy's head of petroleum analysis is stunned by the dramatic surge in gas prices across West Michigan and the Great Lakes.
It's probably one of the most expensive markets in the nation.
Oil prices already high due to the ongoing blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, driven up further due to issues with a nearby refinery over the weekend.
BP's massive Northwest Indiana refinery, the largest in the Midwest, capable of refining nearly 500,000 barrels of oil every day, experiencing a major and sudden power loss at a time of year that other refineries are also carrying out maintenance.
Those issues won't just affect the price at the pump.
It's going to be impactful. Inflation is going to reaccelerate here, just like it did in 2022.
Driving up the cost of everything from farming to flying to food.
But there are some early indications that these cost pressures are adding up and they're starting to impact some specific food price categories.
David Ortega is a food economist and professor at Michigan State University. He says it will probably take a little while before the shock of oil prices catches up to the store shelves.
The better part of 6 months to even longer before we see the full impact reflected on grocery prices.
Perishable food items like produce, meat, seafood, and dairy likely the first to jump in price
on one another. And this is sort of the latest shock that the agri-food system has faced. We're still dealing with the impact of the tariffs and trade uncertainty. There's the impacts of, climate change that's having on production. These things start to add up.
Ortega says that higher oil prices translate into higher gasoline and diesel prices and also impacts the cost of fertilizer. That could lead farmers applying less fertilizer, which could potentially lead to lower yields and then less food being available, which in turn would put upward pressure on prices. Now to your voice, your vote, and two batches of polling focused on the Republican candidates for governor and the Democrats running for the open U.S. Senate seat here in Michigan. Released just a couple weeks apart, they paint a very different picture, it seems, of where the races may stand. We break down the highlights. New numbers are out as we get closer to August, including in the races for the Republican nomination for governor and the Democratic nomination for the state's open U.S. Senate seat, some of the most contested races in this key battleground state. The results from the Glenn Gariff Group for the Detroit Regional Chamber are pretty striking compared to one from Emerson College Polling and Wood TV just a couple weeks ago. In that earlier poll, businessman Perry Johnson was in a statistical dead heat with Congressman John James in the Republican race for governor. And Congresswoman Haley Stevens was in third place in the Democratic race for Senate. But in these new numbers released on Tuesday, Stevens is in first place and James holds a lead. Now, it's a pretty big swing switch up between these two rounds of polls, so why might that be? And that could depend. There are certainly a lot of different details between the two rounds of polling. But after the first poll a few weeks ago, you did see this argument from at least one pollster working for Stevens that this may have underrepresented older and non-college voters, where Stevens may do well. But regardless of how those methods are seen, in Tuesday's Glengarriff poll, older age groups made up more of the respondents. And for those 55 to 64 and 65 and older, Stevens was the top choice in that Democratic race. It's when the new poll got into the younger ranges of age where progressive candidate Dr. Abdul El-Sayed held his advantage. In Glengarriff's new Republican primary poll, the share was even bigger. Well over half of the people polled there were 55 and older. John James held a sizable lead among groups 50 and older. It's important to note, though, that in these results, often the biggest groups were the undecided voters. Things have certainly heated up in recent weeks, but it's a big reminder that many voters are still making their decisions, and the race still ahead is a long one. There's a new coalition being formed with some big-name groups in Michigan. They say people should vote no this November on calling a constitutional convention. If approved, the proposal, which is brought up automatically every 16 years, could lead toward a total rewrite of our state's constitution. This week, representatives from the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, business leaders from Michigan, Michigan Realtors, and the Grand Rapids Chamber argued essentially the risk, in their view, would be too much.
Businesses succeed where there's certainty and stability, and we want to preserve that. The lengthy process of a con would really open up Pandora's box to potentially dangerous changes to our state's constitution.
Back in 2010, the question of a convention was voted down by a roughly 2-to-1 margin. State lawmakers crossed a major milestone this week in their effort to get the next state budget done on time. Coming up, details on how they may look to spend your taxpayer dollars and why it's not a done deal just yet. At the state capitol, lawmakers in Lansing have crossed a major step in finishing the state budget. The state Senate on Thursday passing its education budget. Both the House and Senate have now completed their full budget proposals, made up of both education and general budgets. Combined, according to the legislative documents, the Senate's plan totals roughly $88 billion. The Republican-led House passed its budget proposals last week, listed as totaling roughly $76 billion combined. The Republican-led House and Democratic-controlled Senate will now begin the process of sitting down to negotiate a final singular budget deal. This could be seen as good news for many groups that rely on state funding, like schools, after last year's budget impasse left them to make decisions without knowing how much they would receive from Lansing. And as lawmakers work toward a final deal, federal changes to key assistance programs are raising questions over how it'll get done. 13 on your side traveled to Lansing to get the details. Healthcare, a top issue for millions of Michiganders, but major changes to federal assistance and questions over how the state administers it have seemed to throw vital service into big uncertainty.
When the federal government makes these big changes, that directly affects the states.
In Michigan, it's a fight largely playing out in the next state budget that lawmakers are hoping to finish.
These are taxpayer money at the end of the day, and we need to be able to protect every dollar of taxpayer money that's there.
Officials in Governor Gretchen Whitmer's administration argue they need more resources to keep up with changes out of Washington. Changes including new work requirements on some social safety net programs.
These are not the same work requirements, which in and of itself adds an additional layer of complexity.
Republican House Speaker Matt Hall seemed to agree with new investment to a certain extent.
You're going to have to spend some money and make sure you have the personnel in place to verify people are eligible for the welfare they're receiving.
But not as big an investment as state officials feel necessary. According to legislative documents, compared to Whitmer's proposal, the House's budget passed last week includes much less in resources meant to implement new work requirements for Medicaid and food assistance through SNAP.
What we did is we got rid of the extra stuff and we're funding what actually would be needed for verifying eligibility.
But many Democrats have argued that state and federal Republican efforts haven't helped.
I was extremely disappointed to see House Republicans balance their budget with $300 million worth of negative assumptions. That means they are already assuming that patients will lose their care when Medicaid work requirements begin in January of next year.
GOP leadership argue what they feel is a need for balance between needs and not allowing abuse of the system.
The whole goal on Medicaid is making sure those that truly need it, the poor, the indigent, the working poor that truly need some help to lift it up, get that help.
After the mass shooting at Michigan State University in 2023, state lawmakers have since passed sweeping firearms reform. But for some activists, the work isn't over. Many gathered in Lansing early this past week to continue speaking out.
Ricochet, where will it land today?
A question posed to those gathered on the steps of the Michigan State Capitol Tuesday, and to all who would hear.
Ricochet, where will it land today?
A question that's personally touched those like Mia Reed.
My heart was broken when gun violence stole my child's life, but I am not broken.
Reed, one of many activists who stood as part of what they dubbed a Gun Violence Prevention Advocacy Day at the Capitol.
I know you've heard many stories, and we see many stories in the news. And it makes us sad, and it makes us feel bad. And then we're back to business as usual. It is not business as usual.
Amen. Just behind those doors, lawmakers in recent years have enacted sweeping firearms reform.
Universal background checks, extreme risk protection orders, safe storage requirements.
Many changes met with both celebration from advocates and opposition from those concerned over things like preservation of the Second Amendment.
It would not have happened without all of you and the hundreds and thousands of people across our state who demanded action that you organize and you push for.
Despite what some may see as progress, the shadow of gun violence has remained. Tuesday's event came less than 2 months after a shooting attack at a West Bloomfield synagogue, and just days after a shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, D.C.
Ricochet, where will it land today? The question has echoed long enough, and today we change where it lands.
Board members for one of the state's largest school districts here in West Michigan made decisions this week regarding the future employment of several high-level administrators currently on leave. After the break, details and reaction to what was decided. An update now to a story that 13 on Your Side has been following for months now. On Monday night, board members with Grand Rapids Public Schools made decisions regarding the future employment of multiple high-level administrators currently on leave. 13 on Your Side's Michael Martin heard from an attorney representing one of those GRPS admins, Dr. Brandy Lovelady Mitchell, and has reaction.
At Monday night's GRPS school board work session, members voted against terminating the contracts of either Deputy Superintendent Dr. Brandy Lovelady Mitchell or Chief Area Instructional Leader Bridget Cheney.
That motion fails. All right.
The board split 5-4 on each vote, striking down a motion to not renew their contracts, meaning both will continue receiving paychecks despite remaining on leave for the remainder of the school year.
I think we all collectively as a community need to be very conscientious of the claims we make and the things we say, because this is a situation that got totally conflated into something other than what it was.
In mid-March, GRPS Superintendent Dr. Leadrian Roby told district staff in a memo that Dr. Lovelady Mitchell had been placed on administrative leave. Letters obtained by 13 on Your Side at the time show the superintendent recommending her contract not be renewed over concerns regarding her management style and a culture of devaluing members of her staff.
I think for them not to be a fit with our district does not mean that they are inept or that they have done something wrong or that they have embezzled or they have hurt a kid or any of the things that has been said about them.
An attorney for Dr. Lovelady Mitchell praised the board's vote, but says their decision to keep her out until next year is unnecessarily prolonging the professional and reputational harm she has already endured.
Prioritizing the essential needs of Grand Rapids is at the center of the city's budget for next fiscal year. This week, City Manager Mark Washington unveiled the next city budget proposal, and 13 on Your Side's Nick Nelson was there.
Public safety, economic development, our parks, our streets, make sure that we provide quality, reliable water, wastewater. Those are the basic services that municipalities are responsible for, and our budget helps us deliver those services.
City Manager Mark Washington presented the budget to members of the City Commission Tuesday morning and says with an increased budget of $785.4 million, the City of Grand Rapids is in a good financial standing. He adds that while they plan to lower millage rates, Grand Rapids taxpayers can expect to pay about $70 more this year, in part due to rising property values.
Because we have a growing city, a healthy city, our property values are rising. You want that because you don't want the opposite. You don't want to have lower property rates and have to increase the millage. And so it's at an affordable rate.
Washington says one of the main priorities is public safety, increasing the budget for the police department as they hire 10 new officers and account for expected overtime due to the opening of the Acrisure Amphitheater and Amway Soccer Stadium. The city is doing a study on overtime impacts this summer.
And it's something new. As we know from the history of Van Andel Arena, we overstaffed it originally until we got used to the flow of how the traffic would flow, both vehicular and pedestrian, and just figure out how it operates and what's the best.
With a growing budget and growing reserve funds, city officials say ongoing financial stability is important as costs nationwide continue to increase. The city's chief financial officer, Molly Claren, spoke to commissioners about a proposed $7 million increase to the Budget Stabilization Fund as the national economy remains uncertain.
When we packaged the budget, we didn't know there was going to be a war in Iran. It's a good thing to have. It's like an extra savings account a person might have, for that unforeseen things that pop up.
This is essentially only the beginning of the budget process. A number of workshops and a public hearing are scheduled for next month. A major Michigan utility is asking for a nearly $500 million rate hike. Why they're requesting it, and why at the same time, according to a 13 on Your Side review, they haven't paid any federal income taxes for years. That's next. A major Michigan electric provider is asking for a nearly $500 million rate hike on its customers. DTE Energy, the parent company of DTE Electric Company, filed the rate hike request with the Michigan Public Service Commission on Tuesday. 13 on Your Side, Stephen Bonner has a look at that request and the company's financials.
DTE is asking for about $474 million in increased rates from the commission. That request comes as 13 on Your Side learned through filings with the SEC that the Detroit-based utility company hasn't paid federal income taxes since 2023.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. 5 days after the Michigan Public Service Commission approved a $274 million rate hike for DTE Electric Company, the state's largest electric utility filed notice of its intent to ask for another rate increase. And earlier this week, they did just that, asking for $474 million in increased rate revenues beginning in 2027. DTE says, if approved, average residential ratepayers would see about an $11.06 increase on their bill each month. The utility says the increase will help offset costs from investing in infrastructure, improving reliability, moving toward cleaner energy sources, and more. But what makes this rate increase request unique is a somewhat vague statement from DTE Energy CEO Joy Harris, where she said in part, quote, "As long as the first data center project we're planning comes online as planned by the end of 2027, and we're able to receive other regulatory approvals, we will refrain from filing another rate request until at least 2028. The statement appears to reference the Saline Township Data Center project, now under construction in Washtenaw County. Democratic Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel called this statement a ransom note, as she moves once again to intervene in the rate hike request. In a recent statement, Nessel said in part, quote, "As my office scrutinizes this latest filing, I expect to find the same brand of corporate greed we've seen every time before, from private jet travel fuel to unsupported costs that do nothing to improve reliability or affordability for Michigan households struggling to keep the lights on. The rate hike request also comes as 13 on Your Side learned that DTE Energy did not pay any federal income taxes in 2024 or 2025. A spokesperson for the company confirming having no federal income tax liability in 2025 and telling us that DTE Energy's investments into infrastructure and clean energy generate federal tax benefits that the company passes on to its customers. They added in part, quote, DTE is among the largest property taxpayers in Michigan. In 2025, DTE paid more than $450 million in property taxes that fund local schools, public safety, and other essential community services.
DTE Energy's filings with the SEC show that much of their federal tax liability is offset by business credits and credits from previous operating losses. Their latest rate hike request with the Public Service Commission likely won't be decided until 2027, and any rate increases wouldn't go into effect until at least March 1st, 2027.
And that's the rundown for your week in Michigan politics. Be sure to keep up with all the top political stories of the day, both on air and online at 13onyourside.com.